Thank you guys for joining us. So the reason we've kind of set all this up is that I've got so fed up with how a lot of the CPD was being run and how it was all kind of companies that were sponsoring events, and it was key opinion leaders who were being paid to promote different file systems. And really what the main thing is about the anatomy. And if you understand the anatomy, any file system can work. But what you have to try and do is to figure out which file system is going to work in this specific situation. So what we always say to people is don't get fixed up on systems, don't get fixed up on protocols, try and look at the anatomy that's in front of you and then pick the file system which is going to treat that in an optimum way. So the primary objective of endotherapy is to remove bacteria when it's infected, remove pulp tissue when it's inflamed, create a good coronal seal, and to make the patient symptom-free and happy. And it's the basic concepts are really, really simple. So we basically need to clean, shape, and seal. Now, I think endo went through a really kind of phase where we're just obsessed with shapes, and file systems progressed from when we used to do hand filing, which were actually quite conservative shapes. They used to be 05 taper shapes. But however, we progressed to bigger and bigger and bigger shapes. And the way that a lot of dentists are taught is that if you're struggling to get down into the apical area, to keep doing coronal flare, and the more coronal flare that you do, the easier it is going to be to get into the apical part. But the problem what we need to think about is there's no point having an absolutely perfect endo and then the tooth cracks, or you've removed so much tooth structure trying to optimize the endo that it's like the tooth becomes unrestorable. So we need to think things in the bigger picture. So we need to look at the restorability first, we need to look at the periodontics, and then the endo is the kind of the third thing. What I've totally changed my whole technique in how I treat cases anymore. So we try to be really conservative. So we try to minimize the footprint that we have on the tooth. And a lot of our restorative colleagues are really appreciate that approach. So let's say a case like this has been treated 7 times. So basically they've opened it up, they've dressed it, and because the tooth isn't settling down, they keep on removing more and more dentin in the coronal part. And you can see how thin now the root is in this area. So because it's because the symptoms are unsettling, they think that by making a bigger shape that it's more likely to happen. The actual cause of the problem seems to be in the distal canal, where you can see that there's some calcium hydroxide going into a little split here. So there's no need to keep removing all this coronal dentin. What you need to try and do is understand the anatomy that's there, understand the kind of common variants that are present, and deal with that. So in this case, we didn't even touch that mesial root in the first instance. First visit, we just went in, found the second little kink in that distal root, and the symptoms immediately went. But look at the amount of damage, the iatrogenic damage that is done. I mean, look at the size of the access cavity that's done in the tooth. It's like the first thing that I looked at this tooth is like, is this tooth even restorable? The prognosis for this is absolutely poor compared to, like, when you look at the delicate anatomy that's in the teeth either side, it doesn't make any sense to use big shapes or big one file systems on these teeth. It's like the anatomy that's there is very small and delicate. Therefore, we should try and follow the anatomy that's there and use small and delicate files to be able to follow the pattern and preserve as much tooth structure as possible. So I work in the West End of London, and we've seen how cases from like some of the best endodontists in London over time. So we're seeing a lot of pro taper cases where there's big SX, coronal flare. We're seeing a lot of root fractures on those cases 10, 15 years after they've been completed. So because I do a lot of endomicrosurgery, we're seeing a lot of these cases back. So that in a way has really shaped how I do my endodontic shaping. So it's like we can see that when a good root canal treatment is done, the most common cause of failure is either restorative failure or cracked roots. So if we can still fulfill our endodontic objectives by getting to the apex by allowing fluid exchange to get down into the apical third, by removing the bacterial biofilm, but we can still keep more tooth structure, then hopefully we're going to reduce the instances of root fracture, and we're going to reduce the instance of, like in this case here, where there's just so much coronal dentine removed that the tooth virtually becomes unrestorable over time. So to just reinforce this point, I just want you to look at these micro CT scans. So these scans are amazing, and these are the images that are in my mind all the time when we're doing cases. So it's just look at how small the canal anatomy is. See the shapes of them. So they're not perfectly round shapes, especially look at the distal canal. So if we're putting big taper files in there, all we're doing is making a big hole kind of in the middle of the root. We're just removing more and more tooth structure. We're not actually getting, we're not shaping canal, we're just removing a lot of dentine. So the key in these cases is to get a shape that can be cleaned, then try and use some dynamic irrigation that we can move the irrigate around to get into the areas that we're not able to instrument. And then try and use, I really like using microsuctions as well, where you can see the fluid going into one canal and coming out through the other. And just really trying to create conditions for us to either remove biofilm or to remove the pulpal tissue that's in there. But we can see from these micro CT scans how scary it gets when we get down apically. And one of the reasons why I don't like a lot of the single file systems, and we'll see some more of that, is that if you've got a big file and you're trying to push it down apically, there's not enough room for the irrigant to be around the file. And all that happens is that debris gets pushed in laterally and into all the apical deltas. So it becomes much more difficult to clean. So then when we wash it out, because it's packed in really tightly, it's really hard to actually remove that later on. Whereas if we use a much smaller file, we're able to get some irrigant in front of it. I always try and have irrigant in front of where the file goes. Then the debris hopefully won't be packed in as tight, and most of it will come out in solution. Okay, these are the micro CT scans of an upper molar. So look how delicate the MB2 is. Look at the differences between the canals. So it's like, again, I hate this concept of like treating every canal the same. I mean, we don't have pre-made crowns where we're going to put the crown on the tooth no matter what it is. We don't have pre-made fillings that we're going to cement it in no matter where the caries is. So it's the same with endo. We shouldn't have pre-sized endo files that we're just going to put into the canal no matter what. So what you have to do is you have to think, which is the total opposite of when we run our courses. Most people want a formula and they want a kind of recipe, tell me what to do. But actually what we really do try and teach is like, actually understand what different file systems can do, understand what your objectives are in the case, try and feel what the anatomy is in that particular case, and then you decide your shaping strategy. So it is definitely worth spending time after this to look at this website. It's called the Root Canal Anatomy blog, and it's got amazing micro scans of loads of different teeth, so you can really get a feel of the anatomy that's present in there. So this is a really useful exercise. So this is what we do on our courses, on our hands-on courses in person. So we get people to get the teeth, take different views. And again, look at the existing anatomy that's in these teeth. So they're very small tapered canals. And that's like so common in most of the molar teeth. So look at the existing anatomy that's there. Like, do we really need to remove huge amounts of coronal dentine and able to get down and shape the bottom parts of the root? So because now there's been a huge improvement in the actual properties of the nickel titanium files. So at the start, because the nickel titanium files were really stiff, the reason these protocols were developed was because of limitations in the files themselves. Now that we've heat treated nickel titanium, which make them softer and a lot more flexible, we don't need to use these old concepts. So now, because the files are so flexible, we can do much more conservative shaping. It's always worth, every time I say, it's like keep extracted teeth, have a look at the apical anatomy, and it's like it's really scary, and it's like but it's really good to have this in your mind when you're actually shaping. So the whole idea of the shape we're trying to make is to try and make space for the irrigant to get all around. So the shaping is literally just to allow the hypochlorite get down into the apical part, and then we have to think about how are we going to get the solution in, how are we going to get the debris into solution, and how we're going to get the irrigant to go into the accessory canals, into the apical ramifications to get really optimal kind of endodontic treatment. So a lot of the modern shaping is back from 2010, where some restorative dentists actually started to drive it. So the problem traditionally is a lot of the kind of endodontists have been linked with companies, and they're kind of posting the company's message, which is aimed at how their system works. Whereas these were restorative dentists who were just looking at all the failures that were coming through their practice. So they had all these beautiful root canal treatments done, but there was so many fractures and so many cracked teeth and so many unrestorable teeth. So they actually started devising, okay, when we're doing this treatment, let's minimize our footprint. Let's do much smaller access cavities. Let's do smaller shapes. Let's respect the anatomy that's there. And as they follow them up, their endodontic success was just as good as when they were doing big, massive access cavities as well. So it really has led us to kind of change your thinking on the way that we approach endo. So let's have a look at some of the anatomical studies. So some of the dangerous areas. So we can see that it gets very, very thin. So in lower molars, this isn't the view that we can kind of see on our X-ray. So, but look how thin it gets where there's a little concavity between the canals. So we really want to respect the canals. So when we talk about brushing on the outer part of the curve, there's two danger areas here. It's like the blue areas here. So if we're brushing out measly, we can get very, very thin here. We're always taught to brush away from the furcation, but I mean, again, we're just weakening the tooth by making that. Again, look at the shapes of the canals. If we're doing circular, we have to do a huge circle to be able to incorporate all the anatomy in the tooth. So we realistically have to expect, no matter what kind of sizes or shapes, we're not going to be able to touch all the dentin in the tooth. So what we are trying to do is just create a shape to allow good obturation. As this was a really interesting study which shows how much debris gets packed into the isthmus and into the areas where canals bind or join. So no matter what system they've used to try and do it, if you're using single file systems, it's really, really difficult to remove that debris. And again, when we look at lower sixes, there's a high incidence of middle mesial canals. But again, it's like these canals are in such a thin area of the tooth. Can you see how small, microfine that anatomy is? It doesn't make any sense to use big preparation sizes on those. We need really small, delicate preparations. So during lockdown, finally, I had a chance to do something which I had wanted to do for a long time, is to get minimal endodontic preparation files. I tried for years to get SS White files from the States, but they weren't interested to send them to the United Kingdom. We tried with Dentsply to get some smaller files, but again, they weren't interested because they have such a good market share with their Wave 1 and Reciproc files. So last year, we were finally able to get really, really thin controlled memory files to allow us to do conservative shaping. So the whole idea behind these files is that we can fulfill our endodontic objectives, but still respect the anatomy of the teeth. So when I look back at some of the cases I've done, it's look how small and delicate the roots are, and yet look at the massive coronal flare. Like that's almost like a post preparation here. So we've got a massive amount of tooth structure removed coronally, and then when we look apically, it's very, very, very thin. So I've almost kind of reversed the way that I do it now. I try and keep it very thin coronally and try and open it up a little bit more apically. And this was the first case that I started using the small tapered file. So it was an upper 7. So you can see the kind of difficulties involved in this case. It's so here's the pulp chamber. There's a sharp curvature mesially, it comes down apically, then a sharp curvature distally, and then another curvature right up here to the sinus. So if we're going to use a big taper file on that, we're almost definitely going to almost strip perforate here, but plus the file is going to be too big to get around all that anatomy. So when we have narrow roots and narrow canals, we need to think narrow file systems. Again, this was an old one that I've done, but look at the huge kind of coronal preps to be able to get around that. So at the time, I was quite proud of that. But now when I look at it, I think I've removed far too much dentin here, and I could easily now increase that prep size with the narrow files that we have. So we have to think not just of endo, it's biomechanics. And restorative dentists love this. So it's like if you kind of explain the concepts of why you're considering changing your shaping, like restorative dentists get this straight away. So let me just show you how this case finished up. So, I mean, when we've sealed it, we've got a strip perforation here. This was once we've instrumented this second bit distally, all the symptoms sealed. But I mean, structurally, this tooth is very questionable how long it's going to last. Okay, again, lower incisors, really, really thin teeth. So the bigger the preparations we do in these teeth, the bigger the chance that we're going to have root fracture in the future. In a way, these cases, these incisors, it's almost better to have a minimal prep and they fail because at least we can fix these rather than having big shapes that if they fail, they're going to fail catastrophically and the only option is to extract them. So have a look clinically at what this looks like. So it's really useful to use methylene blue. We just wash it out. And then we're able to see the crack line, and that's associated with a pocket going all the way down. So we know that the crack is in the root. So cone beam CT is amazing for endo. I don't do cone beam CT on every case, but I do use it more and more. And it's an amazing tool to be able to help you plan everything. So you can plan your access cavity, you know, before you touch the tooth, exactly how many canals are. You can save so much tooth structure because you know exactly where the MB2 is, so you don't have to trough for it. So sometimes the MB2 is right beside the MB1. If you know that beforehand, you can save so much time and tooth structure. If you don't know that and you're trying to look for an MB2 all the way over towards the palatal canal and it's never there, you've cut away so much tooth structure for no reason. So really for me, every upper molar, I think it's justified to take a cone beam CT scan. It also really helps us with planning our shapes because if we know the MB2 is joining the MB1 at a certain point in time, we can do a really small conservative shape and use the fluid dynamics to be able to get the fluid flowing between them all rather than opening them up with bigger files. So this was the first, this is the VS Flexi 1304 file. So this is a really super flexible file. So the idea of this, it's got a control memory. So that means that so most of the files that we used to use, when you bend the file, it wants to spring back. So if you bend your file like that, it wants to spring back. So that means as the file is going around a curve and as it's rotating, it wants to straighten all the time. The idea of these control memory files is that when they bend, they stay centered on the bend. They've got a very low restoring force, so they don't want to come back onto the original, they don't want to spring back. So that means they're much more likely to stay in the original anatomy. And these files were brilliant for being able to complete this case in a kind of predictable way. And the reason it looks like that there's more coronal dentine removed here is because that's the MB1 and the MB2 were kind of overlapped. But we've been able to get around all these curves without any worry about file separation because the files are soft, they follow the canals, and just as long as you use the correct techniques, it's really, really predictable to make these shapes. So there's basically two different systems I'm going to show you tonight. We've actually just got a brand new system as well in this week, which I was hoping would be here in time for the course today. But these are our latest ones, which basically have the metal on this is slightly better. So the cutting efficiency is a little bit better than some of the older ones. And there's a really nice glide path file on this. I've been using this for the last couple of weeks, and in probably 90–95% of the cases that I'm doing, the glide path file on this is going straight to length. So it's I'm really excited about getting these files out and getting people's feedback on it. But this is, it's not just one system. I will mix and match files between different systems. So I love these shape files as well. So these are VS Flexi Blue files. So the whole idea of these is that they just shape in the apical 3 or 4 millimeters and they have a regressive taper. So it's like, this is a 1304, that's a constant taper file. The double red one is 1704. So that's a very small tapered file, which will get to length and make a nice shape without removing lots of coronal dentine. The yellow one is a 2006. So it's 2006 just in the bottom 4 millimeters, and then it's a smaller taper above that. The red is a 2506 apically, and again, a small taper, and the blue is a 3006. So in a lot of these really curved canals, we can make a nice big apical shape without removing all the dentine above it. I'm going to skip through this because I know you've got a lot of exercises to do, but this was the first case where I used the VS Flexi Blue files. So when I looked at the X-ray, actually, I didn't think it was going to be that difficult. I mean, the canals look like they're very, very thin. But when I got in, it's like, look at the curvature that was on that. And the files just glided around that really nicely. I was kind of shocked when I seen the post-op X-ray, just how acute that curve is. But look how, if I was using a lot of the other systems, I would have a massive coronal flare to try and get the instruments around that. But instead, we've been able to have a really conservative shape to be able to, and still have like a 2506 apically here. So 2506 apically here, 2506 apically here. So we can fulfill our endo objectives, but we're going to keep a lot more tooth structure. Now, this tooth had been opened for me by the referring dentist, but if you even look at the access cavity, you can actually have the access cavity starting here. So you don't need to remove all this tooth structure in that triangle from here to there. You can do very nice, small, conservative access cavity and still be able to treat all the anatomy. And this was one of the kind of extreme cases that would kind of to just show what is possible. This is a lady, she came in just right after COVID. 2 of her businesses had failed, and financially, she was really trying to minimize the cost that she was going to spend on her teeth. She really had acute pulpitis, up all night, really in tears when she came in to see us. So what we can do is just remove the caries, and because the files are so flexible, and using the tactile control activation, which we'll go through in the videos, we can keep all the occlusal dentin. So it's we can save so much tooth structure, and we still have a 3006 shape here on the distal of this canal. So we can, because all the caries is on the distal of the 5, we can clean all that out, clean out all the mesial caries, and we can leave the mesial marginal ridge intact and do our whole root canal treatment to it. So it opens up amazing possibilities in terms of the amount of tooth structure that we can possibly conserve going forward. So let's get ready now for the exercises. So you all should have the 3D printed teeth. The first video is just doing it hand filing. So it's you're going to shape up to size 25. You can get your teeth ready. If you have any problems, I'll be watching the chat, so you can just let me know as you're going along. Just go through it step by step as you normally would in practice. It says on the video at the start to actually just do it without watching the video, but I think if we do that, it's going to add a lot. Just watch the video and do it as you go along, and you can pick up some tips. And let me know in the chat if you're having any problems. So I'm going to play that video now. So the first exercise, hand filing, 3D printed tooth. Just a little tip to use lots of irrigant as you're doing it, and just watch how I manipulate the hand files. That's the most crucial part of this video. First exercise we're going to do. So the first exercise is to instrument the 3D printed tooth up to at least a size 20, and ideally a size 25. So if you can get size 10, 15, 20, 25 hand file ready, and just place it into the canal. The working length is 22 millimeters, and just instrument it as you would normally to length. Now, ideally, if you do that first, and then you can come back and watch the video afterwards. So just do it the way you normally would do it, and then I'll show you how I would do it, and you can see if you've picked up any little hints or tricks with that. So one of the biggest things I disagree with on nearly all the manufacturer's instructions, it says to instrument the canals up to a size 20 hand files. And for me, I do endo every single day. I never instrument up to a size 20. So the most common thing I will do, I'll use an 8 or a 10 file, but I never use a 15 and never use size 20 file, because what happens is when you go from a size 10 to a 15, the instruments get very, very, very stiff apically as they get thicker. So if you've got very, very narrow canals, you don't want to bring a stiff instrument. And that's why so many people, we see this in courses all the time, they can get a size 10 file to length, but by the time they've got up to a size 20, they've lost a millimeter or they've lost half a millimeter, and they're no longer patent in the canals. And the reason for that is that the stiffness of the stainless steel files, whenever you want to go around a curve, these files are too stiff to take the curve. So it's like they want to straighten and then they create a little step initially and then a fully formed ledge after that. So if you really want to improve your endo, don't go bigger than a size 10 file and then look at some heat treated nickel titanium files. So the difference between these files is that as they go around curves, they don't want to straighten, so they will hold their shape. And it's going to be much easier and much more efficient for you in practice if you go from a size 10 file to then a heat treated nickel titanium file. So let me just show you the sequence of how to manipulate stainless steel files anyway. So always have some irrigation in the canal. And the way I recommend to do it is, so place a file to length and just tap the file to where there's resistance. So in this case, the 10 file is going all the way to our working length without any need to rotate. So what we like to do then is have the size 10 file super loose in the canal. It's just very gentle. So you can see the motions I'm doing. It's small, little, gentle, 90-degree motions. So it's like watch winding motions. So they're not even 90 degrees, less than 90 degrees. So you're at your working length. And then once you're at your working length, very gentle up and down movements. So it's like very small amplitudes, just to get the file really, really loose and make sure it's going to length without any impediments. After you've got your file to length, refill the chamber with fluid. Get your size 15 file and tap that to length and see where it wants to go. So in this case, that's around 19 millimeters. So we've got about 3 or 4 millimeters that we need to get the file to length. So often I see big wrist movements and arm movements even when people are manipulating the files. Again, you need tiny, tiny, tiny little watch winding motions. And what you're trying to do is visualize the curvature. So you're trying to use the tips of your fingers and the resistance from the file to visualize that the path the file is trying to take apically. So there's a lot of resistance to this. So what I'm doing is small motions. I'm going to release the file, clean the flutes, re-irrigate, and again, place the file to length passively. Okay, push, and very, very, very small rotations. So the way that these files work is that they'll cut once the dentine's engaged when you rotate, and then it'll cut and release. So very, very, very small amplitudes of movement. Okay. So now, if it's getting very difficult, it's no harm to go back in with the number 10 file again and just slightly over prepare it. So if you've got a 10 file, if you can get that super loose, you can almost make it a size 12 apically. And then that makes more room for the size 15 to get to length. So as you're going in hand files, the jump from 6 to 8 is small, the jump from 8 to 10 is small, but the jump from 10 to 15 is really, really big. So that's why in difficult cases, people often make the procedural errors in the jump from the 10 to the 15 file. Okay, so we're almost within, so we're within a millimeter of working length now. So you can see the curvature on the file. So now you want to try and visualize where the curvature is in the root. So place that again to length. Very, very, very gentle, just small little rotational movements. Okay, feel the resistance. Normally after 3 goes, I will take the file out and get the number 10 file, recapitulate. So just to make sure you're not forming any little ledges or procedural errors. Place the 15 file passively. So now I'm within a millimeter of our working length. Very, very, very small watch winding motion. So what you're trying to feel is how much rotation and apical pressure you can do. So we're very, very close now, but within half a millimeter of the apex. So clean the flutes, recapitulate with your 10. There's still fluid in the canal, so I don't have to re-irrigate at the moment. Again, small, small, small motions. So I'm going to keep saying that the whole way through this. That's so important. Don't try and rush this.
almost to length now. I'm a quarter of a millimeter from length. I'm trying to feel the file as it passes around that second curvature. And now I'm pretty much to length. So just want you to make a note how long it took for me to do that with the stainless steel hand file. And for me, the risks of doing that are so much higher with a stiff stainless steel file rather than using a very flexible nickel titanium file. So not alone do you save a lot of time by using night tie, but also for me, it's a lot safer as well. Okay, so I'm at length there now with my 15 file. Okay, what I'm going to do is just very, very, very gentle, just up and down, just very gentle up and down motions, tiny amplitude, so less than half a millimeter. Now you should be very careful with this because it's very easy to cause a procedural error when you do this. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to slightly over prepare the canal with a size 15 file, just so it's going to make it a little bit easier to get my 20 file to length as well. So let me know in the comments what you're feeling when you're doing this. So it's like, are you able to feel the file negotiating around the canals? And are you able to feel how much pressure you should put on apically? And are you able to feel the files actually engaging with the plastic in this case and the cutting? Okay, so we've got our 15 file to length now. How you know you're finished with the instrument is that basically tap it and it should go passively to length without having to do any rotational movements at all. So we've got the 15 file to length. Okay, now we're going to go to size 20. So this is a file I absolutely hate. So for any difficult cases, clinically, I would never, ever, ever use this. So I'm just going to place that passively. So it's about 20 millimeters. So 2 millimeters worth of work to do in the most difficult part of the canal. So you really have to control the motions that you're putting on this file now to be able to negotiate. So again, it's very, very, very small amplitudes of movement. There's a lot of resistance on this instrument. Okay, so place it passively to length, rotate, 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 rotate. So clockwise, anti-clockwise, clockwise, anti-clockwise. Very, very, very small angles. Okay. Take the file out, recapitulate with your 10. And just go past working length and make it a tiny bit easier, and just up and down motions with your 10. That's to break up any debris into solution, and so that you're not going to get caught with that. So we know we still have patency, which is very important. We're within a millimeter now of our working length. Okay, so we're almost there. So because we've overworked our 15 file, it's going to be a little bit easier to get our 20 file to length now. So we're within half a millimeter of getting our 20 file to length. Again, very, very, very small motions. Now, if you see that there's debris building up on the cutting flutes, it's really, really important to have the cutting flutes clean. If the flutes are full of debris, you're not going to be able to cut any more denting. Okay, so I've got now the 20 file to length. Just going to gently rotate and then irrigate again and recapitulate with my size 10 file. Okay, so when you're irrigating, make sure that the needle never binds within the canal, so up and down motion. So our number 10 file goes, I've got patency there, so we haven't transported, and the way we know we finished our preparation is that literally place our file, tap it to length, and it should go passively to our working length. Okay. Like that there. So we follow the curvature all the way right down. We remain centered in the canal. And if you like, ideally, you can go up to a size 25, just so you can see the difficulties in negotiating difficult anatomy. So the bigger the size you go with your files, the more difficult it is. Just to prove we've still got patency there, that's our number 10 file, still remaining centered in the canal. Okay, so it is possible to do with stainless steel files, but technically it's a lot more difficult. So let's have a look now and see how the VS Flexi controlled memory file system handles those scripts.
Okay, great. So we'll give you a couple of more minutes just to finish off on that. If you can type in the comment section once you're done, that would be great. Even if you don't get to finish it all, we just want to keep the pace going reasonably quickly so you can come back to it. I think the whole point of that exercise is just to show how difficult it is to use hand files in difficult anatomy. I mean, I never use a hand file bigger than a size 10. So a size 10 loose, and then I will go straight on to rotary files. And it's, and even now, I mean, I do a lot of cases where I hardly use any hand files at all, but I mean, that's for real advanced kind of, once you're doing endo every single day. But to be really safe, have a size 10 loose and then go on to rotaries. It's much quicker, it's much more efficient, and it's really safe if you use the tactile control activation, which we're going to teach you now in the next part. When we do this in-person course, it's a little bit hard on kind of online to really see what everybody's doing. But in general, when we do this in-person courses, 90% of the participants will have ledged or blocked the canal. So they're unable to get around the second curve. Once they get to 20, when they try to get to 25, it probably goes up to 95% ledge or block the canal system. So the hand files, as they increase in size, get a lot stiffer, and stiff files are not good for delicate anatomy. So how many are finishing, Nadine? So once you're finished, just type in the comment section. Once at least half people are done, then we'll move on to the next part. Let us know how it's going as well, even if it's not going very well. I mean, it's like the key thing to take out of this is what's happened. Do you feel it's how you're manipulating the files? Are you able to feel the files as they go around the curve? Are you able to understand how much pressure to put on the file? Have you been using enough irrigation?
We have a question. The 15, for someone, their 15 file is unwinding, preparing itself to SS obturate.
Yeah, to what?
Double S obturate. I don't know what that means. Sorry. Capital S is to double.
Stainless steel.
Oh.
So the 15 file is unwinding. Okay, so yeah, no, absolutely. So generally the 15 file, if the 15 file is unwinding, it means that there's been too much torsional force in the file. So that means you've been twisting it too hard that the files are beginning to resist. So the whole thing in stainless steel files is to be able to feel with your fingers how much force is on the file and how much work it's actually doing. So it's like, again, it's hard to do this online, but it's like what you need to do is when you're holding the file, it's literally, you're trying to rotate it in a way to feel the file engaging in the canal, how much it's cutting how much it's engaging when it cuts, and knowing how hard to kind of press and when to take it out. So that's the whole tactile feedback, it's called. If it's unwinding, you've put too much pressure on the file. So you do need to check that. Clinically, if that happens, just discard the file once it starts to unwind, because the risk reward is just too low if you're doing a difficult case. But again, it just goes to show why you shouldn't use size 15 files. I mean, it's the jump from 10 to 15 is so much damage gets done from that file, and the jump from 15 to 20, even more damage gets done. So, I mean, when we do these, when we do the courses on extracted teeth, most people can get a size 10 and they can get patency. By the time they get to a size 20 hand file, they've lost a millimeter in length. And they're like, okay, I'm stuck. The 10 file can't get to length. It feels rock hard. And that happens clinically so often as well. And the reason for that is that as you come to size 15 and 20, the file, if there's any bit of a curve there, wants to straighten. So you're going to start cutting on the outside part of the curve. It's like if you're driving too fast in a car trying to go around a curve, you're going to go straight forward. And it's the same with the stiff stainless steel files. Yeah.
We've got 10 people saying they're completed. We have a question, what about the golden median
Yeah.
file? Another one saying I have 2.5C files. Would you suggest using those after the 10 has gone to length before moving on to the 15?
No, so I mean, part of the reason I'm trying to show you in this exercise is that I don't think you should use a 15, 20, 12.5. I don't think you should use any of those files. I think you should use a size 10 file, get that loose, and then go on to a super flexible rotary file. I was hoping I was going to be able to get this file for you for the course today, but I will send out a sample to everybody on the course today. But there's this file is brilliant, and it's you'll use it in the exact same way as the VS Flexi Gold, but it's once you've got a size 10 file, then move on to a file like this. This is like a 15 variable taper file. So rather, this is super soft. So it's going to go around curves. It's not going to bend back. It's going to stay centered in the canal, and it's super flexible. So it's going to make your life so much easier. If you've been in practice hand filing up to size 20, your life is going to change for the better, or well, at least for your endo life is going to change for the better. And there's going to be a huge, huge difference in your enjoyment of root canal treatment. It's going to become a lot more efficient. It's going to become a lot more predictable. But there is just a small learning curve that you have to master. And once you become confident with this, then you're gonna see your results improve massively. Okay, we're gonna give just 10 more seconds, and then we're going to move on to the next part. I mean, don't worry about the hand filing. Don't worry if you've had procedural errors. It is worth. Yeah. Sorry, another question.
What's the cross section on the new files?
Yeah, we'll come that to the end. Let's just keep on. We'll keep on track with all of it, and I'll send you all the information on the new files later. So the second part, okay, so just sorry to finish off on the hand filing. It is worth just make a little note of what happened. Send us kind of your comments on each of the sections as well. So at the end of it, just to have a little reflection on what happened. If you managed to file up to size 20, you managed to keep patency, well done. That's absolutely amazing, because technically that's really difficult to do. If you made a procedural error, try to figure out where you made the procedural error. If you unwound the files, you need to have a look at how you're manipulating the files and how much force and how much pressure that you're putting on it. Have a look back at the video again. I'll send anyone who needs a link for that, and how we manipulate the files. So really, really, really small units of rotation. So you're not doing big rotations. You're not using a wrist. You're not using a hand. It's really, really, really delicate motions. Okay, so we're going to go on. The next one is VS Flexi Blue. So if everyone can get your blue system out, try and be organized in a way that you just have a size 10 file now and the VS Flexi Blue system. So this is, a lot of endodontists use this system. This is a very small taper file system. So you need to understand the fluid dynamics and irrigation to use this. But the 17.4 blue file is a brilliant file as well. I think, so even if you do a lot of general dentistry, it's worth having that file kind of in the background, and it can come in useful at times. So once you get to use it, you'll see. Yeah, so another question.
Is that the VS Flexi DPS?
No, so the VS Flexi DPS is the gold system. So you want the VS Flexi Blue. So if you look at the back of the pack, it will be 2006 orifice opener. That's the same on both systems. Then you'll have 1304, 17.4, 26, 25.6, and 36. So they're the really thin ones. So if you look at both sets, they'll be the thinner files and they'll be blue color.
So it's well established that when technically good root canal treatment is completed, that the success rates are really high. But what we tend to find when there is failure, it's often restorative, or there's cracks in the roots that cause the failure rather than a pure endodontic failure. And one of the things that's within our control is to preserve the amount of pericervical dentine. And that's the whole idea of the VS Flexi Blue system, is that it's a control memory file. So we can use these files in a way where we don't have to do big coronal shapes. So a lot of the traditional teaching was based on the limitations of the actual nickel titanium instruments themselves. So because the instruments were quite stiff, we needed to make big shapes. So we needed to do big coronal flares, and to enable the instruments to get down around the apical curvatures. Now that we've got super flexible control memory files, we don't need to do those big coronal shapes anymore. So we can still meet our endodontic objectives, but restoratively, we can preserve so much more of the pericervical tooth structure. So the area just above and below the alveolar bone has been shown to be a critical area for the development of cracks. So the more of that tooth structure we can preserve, the better the restorative prognosis for the tooth is long term. So we can have really good endo outcome, and we can try and improve as much as possible the restorative outcome for the tooth as well. So let me go through the actual steps in using the system. So like we showed in the previous one, always have the canal full of fluid at the time. So you can use a number 10 scatting file. And as we showed in the previous one, just tap that to length and see where the file wants to go. So in this case, we have a little bit of work to do to get it to our working length of 22 millimeters. Clinically, you attach your apex locator to confirm that you're at your zero reading. And just very, very, very gentle watch winding motion, just to make sure that the 10 is loose. So don't start with any rotary files until your 10 is loose within the canal. Now, if it's a very difficult case and your 10 can't get to the apex straight away, you can do it in a staged approach, but you don't want to bring a rotary file any deeper into the canal system than where your 10 file has already. So let's just go through the sequence on the VS Flexi Blue file system. Now, you don't need to follow the sequence. So if you have your own way of doing things, you can use different files for different reasons, but just for demonstration purposes, we're going to go through all the files that are in the system. So the first file is the orifice opener. This is the 2006. And the whole idea is to preserve the pericervital dentine. So you really don't want to use this file deep down into the canal. So the purpose of this file is just to be able to reposition the canal orifice and just to make it easier for some of the really thin files to get actually into the canal system. Because the tips of these files are so flexible, you want to place the file passively into the canal. So you don't want to rotate the file before you place it in the canal. You want to just place it directly into the canal, just engage it, and then activate. So 1, 2, 3, and you're done. So you're going to be able to see exactly where on the flutes where the file engages. Place it to activation, and then just 1, 2, 3 bites, and you're finished. So you can put that file away. Now, the reason these files can be really good, if you've got an area where it's like really difficult to access, you're able to pre-curve these files. So you can make it a lot easier to actually get it into the canal system. And once you've those first couple of passes done, then it'll make it a lot easier. If your 10 file hasn't gone to length in the first instance, once you remove those coronal interferences, then it becomes a lot easier to do that. So our next file now is we're going to go with the 1304. So I'm going to place this passively to length. So we can see in this case, the file goes to 19 millimeters. So we know now we need to work 3 millimeters in the most difficult part of the anatomy. So remember how long it took us to get from a 10 to 15 when we were using hand files. So let's see how it goes here. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. Okay, so 3 bites and out. Okay, I clean the flutes in between each pass. I'm going to irrigate. Get a number 10 file. Just pass it just to your working length or half a millimeter beyond. Make sure the flutes are clean. Now don't rotate it. Place it passively for length. Now I'm 21.5 millimeters. So in the first pass, I've almost got to working length. So this now I just need to do half a millimeter and I'm to length there now. So three passes and you're out. So already in literally 2 goes, we've managed to shape it to a 1304. The next file is the 1704. So it's not a constant taper. So the 1704 is only in the apical 3 millimeters, and then it's a regressive taper after that. So that means it's going to save a lot of the pericervital dentine. So we're not using big creps and deep big shapes. So again, just use your 10 file. Place the file passively into the canal. So you can see here the file already goes to 21 millimeters. So we just need to shape 1 millimeter on the apical part. So because we're placing it passively, the file is just literally engaged now in the canal. So activate it. 1, 2, 3, and hash. Okay, so you never press it. So you don't want to press the file. You're just seeing where it wants to go. Resistance out, resistance out, resistance out. So do that 3 times, and then go back in with your 10 file, and that goes nicely to length. I'm just going to slightly over-instrumented. So you never keep the file at the same. So you always have the rotary file moving. So one of the big mistakes I see constantly is when people get to working length, they leave the file rotating without moving the handpiece. The handpiece should always be moving because you do not want the tip to get caught into a little fin or get caught into the isthmus. So you want that moving up and down all the time. So you want to stay in control of that. So now we've got our 1704 to length. We're going to move on to our 2006 file. So again, we're going to place that to length. So in this case, the 2006 file goes about 19.5 millimeters. So I'm just placing that passively. I'm not rotating the file when it goes in, and I activate it. So 1, 2, feel it's doing a lot of work, this file now. So this is really opening up the canal anatomy apically. So I'm going to take our irrigate, I'm going to go back in with our 10 file, just recapitulate just through the apex. And make sure the flutes are clean before I use it again. So if you've got a little bit of gauze, or if your nurse can do it in between passes. So I'm going to place it passively again. Now, so I'm 21 millimeters. So in that first pass, we've got down to 21 millimeters. So we just need 1 more millimeter. So engage and out, engage and out, engage and out. And I've just got to working length there. Okay. So again, irrigate, up and down. Use your size 10 file to recapitulate. Okay, it's sliding nicely to length. And the way that you know that you're finished your preparation is, does it slide passively to length? And in this case, we're about 0.5 millimeter. So I'm just going to work that last 0.5 millimeter a little bit more. 1, 2, 3. Clean the flutes. And then check. So does it slide passively to length? And there we do. So that's our double curvature file to 2006. For the purpose of this exercise, clinically, I would often accept that if it's a very difficult anatomy. You can go to a 2506, and for the purpose of this exercise, once you've got it done, feel free to do that. If it's an easier anatomy, or if it's got a lesion on the tooth, you may want to go up to a 3006, but the technique is the exact same. So if you just follow that technique, it's a very, very, very safe way to be able to negotiate difficult anatomy. I'm just going to pop the tooth out. So you can see, got patency, size 10 file is right through the apex. We've remained perfectly centered in the canal and sliding beautifully to length.
Okay, great. So again, let me know when you're done with that exercise. I'm going to, so if you've got any questions or if you run into any problems, you can pop it on the chat. And so for that, I mean, I use that system for really narrow, difficult cases. And so there's a question there, how do you know what size to finish on? So again, it's all by feel. So you'll see from our Facebook group, there's different kind of there's different opinions on that as well. I mean, personally, I like to shape it up to, even if it's really difficult, a minimum of kind of 2006. But having said that, it's like you have to feel where the files wants to go. If the canal is so narrow that even the 1704 is really struggling to get to length, what I would often do then is make a deeper shape. So I want to see where is the 20 comfortable going, activate it. Where's the 25 comfortable going? And then I'll go back in with 17 again. So you kind of make a little bit more progress with that. So you kind of do waves rather than trying to force one file to get to length. Do kind of waves of, so we'll go 17, 20, 25, try and get a little bit deeper down with the 17, 20, 25, and do that until it's until you feel the files going to length and where they're comfortable going. So like I said there, sometimes if you get your 17 to length, you can slightly over instrument. Now what that means is that when you've got 17 to your working length, rather than going to working length and come out, just do very gentle up and down motions. Now I'm talking very small 1 to 2 millimeter amplitudes of movement. And that will make it into an 18, into a 19, so that bringing your 20 file to length actually then becomes a lot easier. And that's a really kind of nice tip to be able to increase the apical size on really difficult cases. But to directly answer your question, it's if you look at the flutes when they come out, and if you see that the bottom couple of millimeters are covered in debris, then, I mean, you've engaged all the kind of canal walls all the way around, then you can be reasonably confident that you've made a shape. But the whole idea is that you want to make a shape that you're going to be able to get your irrigant down to. Once you've got a 2006 apically, you will be able to get your irrigation down to that length. So that's, for me, that's kind of the minimum shape I aim to get. But if an anatomy is just too difficult, I will, rather than doing a procedural error, I will accept the limitations that sometimes the anatomy place on us. So it's always a balancing act. It's like every part of dentistry. You have to try and react to what you find in front of you. So there's another question here. Motor would be reciproc or just rotating. So, I mean, for these files, you don't need to use reciprocation very rarely. I mean, you can use reciprocation, but the whole idea of reciprocation was that when we had really stiff files, so the original reciprocation was used on the ProTaper F2. So that was a really stiff file. So if you use that file in rotation around difficult anatomy, it often broke. So the idea of using it in reciprocation was that it didn't break as easily. Whereas now that we've got like the super flexible files, we're not worried. We know that the files are really flexible. They'll go around the curvature. The resistance to cyclic fatigue is amazing. It's really good. Now, where you do need to worry, though, is the torsional strength of these files. So that means you can never push them. So it's like, that's why using that tactile control activation is really safe. So if you place the files to resistance and then activate and out, that's really, really safe way to do it. If you push them uncontrolled and the little tips get caught in a fin or an isthmus, it's really easy for the tips to come off because they're very delicate files. Whereas if you use them the way that we're teaching you, it's really, really, really unlikely that you're going to have problems with them. So if you have a loose size 10 file, you can use these files in rotation really safely. So yeah, we'll talk about what's the chance of a fracture in a narrow canal. So there's two ways the files can fracture. As I said, one is torsion and one is cyclic fatigue. If you have torsion, if cyclic fatigue is basically going around a bend, so it's like how you break a plastic ruler. These files are really safe in cyclic fatigue. So if you place them to length in rotation and you use the small movements, I don't think you're going to break them in cyclic fatigue. So the way that you can break them, as I said, is if you push them and the tip gets bent and it gets stuck in a little isthmus. But if you place them exactly as we showed you in this, they're really, really, really resistant files. But it's a confidence thing. You need to do what I say to everybody. You need to do like 10 cases to get a feel, because it's a very different feel. If you're used to using reciproc, where you're literally just bulldozing a file down the canal, you don't really have much feel in those systems. Whereas for this, it's a very, very different feel because it's such a soft, flexible file. So we'll talk about the irrigation once we've kind of all the preparations done. If you just let us know how you're getting on, if you've got that preparation done. So once the majority of people have it done, we will move on. So well done, David's done. So how did it go, David? Did you manage to keep patency? If you let us know how it went as well, that'd be great. So it's a very different feel to what a lot of you may be used to. And remember, this is a really difficult canal system. It's okay, well done. So Paran kept patency, didn't with hand file. So exactly, and this is, I think you'll find this clinically as well. Cases where you got patency with your 10 file, and then when you come to obturate, you're a millimeter short. A lot of that will stop happening once you use these really flexible nickel titanium files. Excellent. So it looks like there's really good results coming in there. Even if it's not going perfectly, don't worry. I mean, there is a learning curve with this as well. If you've had problems, let us know. We can send you out some more 3D printed teeth as well, and we'll help you kind of get the technique right to make sure that you do get confident with it. It'll make such a big difference in your kind of enjoyment of endo if you use these rather than 15 and 20 hand files. So we're going to give 2 more minutes and then we'll go on to the last exercise, which is the VS Flexi goals. Now, Personally, I think that a lot of people who are using the VS Flexi Gold are going to change over to these new files that we've just got this week. The reason being is that well, there's a couple of reasons. Number one is the orifice opener in this system is much nicer. It's a small little kind of bullet shape. And so it's really flexible. So if you've got patients with limiting opening, you can bend them right in and get them into awkward angles. It just cuts really beautifully and quickly. But the main kicker for me is the path file. I think we're going to get amazing feedback on that. The other files then are 2004, 2504, 3004. But then we've also included a file in this, which is a 27, which is the same shape that a Wave 1 primary makes and that a kind of Pro Taper F1. And I think what we're trying to do is, normally I wouldn't use a file that size. What we're trying to do is to help dentists transition down to smaller shapes. So that if there's a case where, yes, I want to do a big shape, I want to go in with the 2007, that file is there for you to have an option to do it. You'll find that sometimes if you've got a 2007 and there's a big lesion on it, a 20 tip is still a small size. So you'll find that, okay, you've done your 2007 shape, then you can put your 2504 in afterwards and your 3004, and it'll be much easier to get to that bigger apical shape without sacrificing any more denting. So we're kind of putting it in as a kind of transition file to help people kind of go from the big shapes to gradually transition down into smaller shapes. Okay, so great. All the messages are coming in there. People seem to be doing well. So you can message me directly as well if you just want us, or message Nadine directly if you just want a private message as well if you are having any problems. But we'll give one more minute and then we'll be ready to go on to the... So if you're completed, get your third block ready, get the VS Flexi Gold files ready, and we'll go through that as well. So 30 seconds and then we'll move on to the last exercise.
So already, hopefully at this stage, you've done the exercise with the hand files. So again, fill the model with my number 10 file. Get 1 more millimeter file to length. So now file.
Okay, sorry about that. I was just checking to make sure that's definitely the right video.
Demo the VS Flexi Gold system. So this is good for kind of beginners or people who just want to try out the VS Flexi to control memory files. So already, hopefully at this stage, you've done the exercise with the hand files. So again, fill the model with liquid. So make sure during all these exercises that there's liquid in the canal. Working length again is 22 millimeters. So just place your 10 file passively, tiny, small clockwise, anti-clockwise motion, and remove the file. So the orifice opener for the gold and the blue system, the dimensions of the files are the exact same. So again, for the orifice opener, you're trying to preserve the pericervical dentin. So you just want to place it passively into the canal, 1, 2, 3, and just to try and reposition the entrance. You don't want to bring that file deep down into the canal, so you're just removing an excessive amount of dentin. So once you've done that with your orifice opener, then the first file in the gold system is the 1304. So this is the same shape, same taper as the blue system, and you use it in the exact same way. So basically, place the file to length, and this it's 18.5 in this tooth where it's engaged. And so once it's snug, so if I try and remove that, I feel resistance. So place it passively, 1, 2. And take it out, okay? So you can see there's lots of the flutes are filling up with dentin there. So I'm going to irrigate again. I'm going to go back in with my number 10 file. So just past my working length, so 22.5. Make sure the flutes are clean. So ideally your nurse is doing that while you're doing the recapitulation. So now I'm at 21 millimeters. So again, I've just placed the file passively to length. Engage 1, 2, 3, and out. Okay, so you're not pushing the file, you're not forcing the file, you're just seeing where it wants to go, and you're doing 3 bites. Now, if you're nervous with kind of a new system, you can just do 1 bite. So you just place it passively, engage, and then 1 and out. Clean the flutes, and you can do that. So the process will be a little bit slower. It's a really, really safe way to do it until you get the feel of how to use the control memory. So we're now to length with that. So again, I'm going to get my size 10 file, just go through the apex, and again, irrigate. So up and down motion with your irrigant. Now we're going to go for the 1704. So exact same technique again. So place it to length. And 1, 2, 3, and out. So you can see, if you want to see exactly where the file is working, you can check the flutes. Irrigate. Back in with your number 10 file. Okay. It's going to break up the debris. Make sure the flutes are clean. Place the file to length. So now I'm at 21 millimeters. So we just need to get 1 more millimeter. So 1, 2, 3. So almost to length. Irrigate. Recapitulate. And third pass now, hopefully we'll get to length this time. So 21.5. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, and I'm at length. So it's the same with the blue system. It's how do you know when you've got to length? So just place the file passively, and it should go all the way to your working length. Okay, so once you've gone to your working length passively, then you know you've prepared the canal enough. Okay, so we're going to move on to the yellows. This is the 2004 now. So place it passively. So I'm at 20 millimeters now. So we need to work the last 2 millimeters. So 1, 2, 3. Back in my 25. Okay. And irrigate. Make sure the flutes are clean. Okay, 21 millimeters now. 1, 2, 3, and out. Make sure the flutes are clean. Irrigate. Back in with your number 10 file. And generally with the third pass you get to length, but don't rush it. It's whatever the canal wants to give you. Now, if it's struggling, it's a good idea to just step down a file size again. So if you feel that the 20 is struggling to get to length, go back down to your 17.4, place it passively, and just brush a little bit those last couple of millimeters, just so you can make a little bit more room for your 20 file to get to length. Okay, place it passively, 1. That's double curve, that's really, really, really going to be sticky. Okay. This is a slightly bigger taper than the blue files. It takes a little bit more time just to fully instrument. So now that I've just widened that curve in the second curve, hopefully now that's going to make a little bit more room for the 20 file to get to length this time. So never force a file. So if you feel that one of the files isn't going to length, just using the exact same technique. So I'm going to go over again, just in summary. So place the file passively, and then engage and out, engage and out, engage and out. So let's have a look here. So we've got our file and the 10 centered right in the middle of the canal. We've kept all the curves beautifully. No transportation, patency has been maintained, and we've done it in a fraction of the time that it would take to do by hand instrumentation. It's a much safer technique. Okay, thanks for your attention. If you have any other questions, you can pop them in the comments.
Okay, great. So if anyone's had problems with 3D printed teeth, we'll send you out more. We'll also send out, if just message us, we'll send you out some of the brand new files as well. If you want to practice any of those again, just let us know. We can send you a link to a video too, and you'll be able to do it step by step. So hopefully you're able to, sorry about the background noise on that one, but it should be fine. Now the key on that is it's so simple, and it's just having the repetition to keep doing it the same way. So coronal, like use a very small coronal flare. So when you're using that orifice opener file, just a couple of millimeters in it, and all it really is, all the coronal file is literally just to reposition the orifice and just make it easy to get your files in. Now another tip and another thing that we kind of see mistakes happening is when you place the files, especially when you're using these really thin files, is just don't spin them on the motor until you've actually got them into the canal system, because they're heat treated and they're soft. If you spin them in the motor when they're slightly bent, they will take a big elliptical path, and it's going to be much harder to try and get them into the canal when they're spinning like that. So what you want to do is put a slight pre-curve on it, have it on the motor, place it passively into the canal, press it right down until it engages, and then activate the motor. And then depending on the feel, so if it feels like it's going down nicely, you can go 1, 2, 3 out, clean the flutes. If you feel that it's really struggling, go see where it wants to go, 2, 3 passes, then come up, do a bigger file slightly back from that, and then just do waves until you get to length. And that's a really nice, predictable way to be able to do it. Okay, so any questions on the kind of basic technique of the tactile control activation? So basically what tactile control activation means is that you're placing the file into the canal, you're pressing it until it feels resistance, then you're pressing the button on the motor to activate it. So it's the original technique is that you just press the button and do 1 pass and come out. The technique that I use in a more modern technique is that you do 3 passes with it. So the brand new files are ToothSaver or Shaper files. We don't have them on the website yet. At the moment, we have some of the specialists trialing them out because literally they just arrived this week. I was hoping to be able to get them to you. But if you want a sample of them, just message us. We'll also, I think general dentists are going to love these files. I think these are going to be a really, really, really nice system. And you've just so many options. I mean, so there'll be some cases where you just need to use the orifice opener, the glide path file, and you'll be able to finish on a 2004. There'll be other cases where you can use the orifice opener, glide path file, and you can go straight to a 2007. There'll be some cases where you use so you don't need to go through every single file in the sequence. You can pick and choose depending on exactly what you need. So again, try not to think in terms of systems unless you really want to be a recipe driven. Try and think in terms of, right, what do I need to shape this canal? So great. So just we have a question there now. Do we have matching GP points for the finishing file? So yes, so we have 2004, we have 2504, we have 3004. I tend not to have millions and millions of different GP points. What we use is, do we have the Gutta Percha ruler? It's in the little black box. What I use, and this is brilliant, is this Gutta Percha gauge. So, I mean, there's loads of different Gutta Percha gauges. This is the one that we have, which is basically, can we get the light stronger? Okay, so this is a ruler, and it's got all the GP sizes here in the back. So if you want to do a size 25 tip, you just put the GP point in a 25 tip, and there's a blade on the back, and you just cut it and you'll make it. So basically, I normally have 20, 25, 30 or 4 GP point. Now, if I want to make a 35 or 40 or 4 GP point, I'll just put so let's say if I want to make a 40 GP point, I'll get the 30 or 4, put it into the 40 hole here, cut it, and now that's a 4004 GP point. So rather than having loads and loads and loads of stock of GP, I basically have medium fine GP points, 2004, 2504, and 3004. So they're the kind of 4 GP things I have. In terms of paper points, I have 1504, I have 2002, 2502, and 2004, and I have 3004, 2504, 3004. So I have about 5 or 6 different options, paper points, and I have 4 main GP points. The other GP points that I do use as well is I use 02, 45, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, the kind of O2 taper. They're big points for like palatal canals, for like wide distal canals, or for upper central incisors, where I want a big apical size, but I don't want a massive taper, because if you use GP points like a lot of the 06 points, they're just too big and you get taper lock where they won't go to length. Now, the other thing about, so if you start using the tooth saver files, because the metal is softer, so if you finish on a 2504, sometimes you need to use a 2004 GP point. Now, that's not a problem if you're going to use a bioceramic sealer, because the bioceramic sealer, like the one fill, doesn't shrink. There's lots of other bioceramic cements that you can use as well. The reason I like one fill is because it flows really nicely, and it's just really easy to use. So again, with the GP points, it's all about gauging. Just because you've prepared it to a certain length, you don't have to match the cone with the GP point. So just get the cone that fits to length. And it's not like the old techniques where you had to have as much GP as possible. The reason we used to try and pack as much GP into the canal as possible was because all the sealers shrunk. Now that we've got sealers that don't shrink, it's actually almost the opposite, where we want more sealer and less GP, because GP doesn't seal anything. So GP is literally just a carrier to bring the sealer down to the apical part of the canal.
What's the difference between the blue and the gold?
Okay, so the difference between the blue and the gold is it's the taper and how they're heat treated. So the taper is smaller on the blue, so they're a lot of endodontists like those small shapes. If you're just doing endo occasionally, it's probably going to be easier for you to use the slightly bigger shape. So if you use the gold or the tooth saver files, the gold is a little bit easier to obturate because the shape is bigger. If you're going to use the blue files, you have to use the medium fine gutta percha points. So they're very thin 03 taper points. And then you need to use a gutta percha gauge or one of these type rulers, GP cutters, to make the tip of the GP at whatever size it is. So if you finish on a blue VS Flexi blue file, or if you finish on the VS Flexi blue file, that's a 30 tip. So you'll get your medium fine comb, put it in the 30 hole, cut it, or ideally your nurse does, hands it to you measured, and then you inject some one fill into the canal, and then you just place your GP to length. And that's a really, really, really predictable, easy way to obturate.
Do you use things in files 20, 25, etc.?
No. So I use the GP to gauge. So I think that's the easiest way. I think I just don't like using stiff files in the apical anatomy at all. And so what I will normally do is, once I've finished all the preparation, I will get, well, the file I use now is I use the 15 glide path file from the tooth saver files. That's a brilliant file. I attach that onto my apex locator. I find it much easier to use than a number 10 file for getting my final working length. Then once I have my final working length, then I will inject the one fill, place the GP point, and I'll use the GP to gauge the file.
Which sealer has the least shrinkage?
So that's why I recommend one fill. It doesn't shrink. In fact, there's a very tiny expansion on it. Whereas all the traditional sealers like AH plus shrink, the zinc oxide eugenol shrinks, all the calcium hydroxide sealers. So all the traditional sealers shrink. Whereas the bioceramic sealers, they absorb water, so they expand slightly on setting.
So just to confirm, the taper for the blue is 6% and for the gold is 4%, is that correct?
No. So the gold, yes, is 4%. The taper on the blue is just 6% on the apical 3 millimeters. So it's 6% in the apical 3 millimeters, and then it gets smaller. And that's why you can't use an 06 cone or you can't use an 04 cone. You have to use the medium fine cones for that system.
How difficult is retreatment with the bioceramic sealers, such as one film?
So I did one yesterday, and the whole idea is that that's why you're placing the GP cone, so that if you do need to retreat the case, you can follow the GP down, and that will get you to the apical part. So yesterday, when I retreated a case, I could see the bioceramic bonded to the dentine, which is really good. But the idea of having the GP cone in place is that you can follow the GP down to the apical anatomy should you need to retreat, as opposed to just injecting sealer into the case entirely. So there's a couple of times where if I know that we're going to be doing surgery later, I will just inject sealer and not put any GP at all, so that when it comes to the surgical part, it's a lot easier than I just literally need to resect it, make sure that there's no isthmuses or any lateral anatomy there. And the surgical procedure is much easier then because you're just resecting onto the set bioceramic sealer.
And two final questions. Do you have any evidence? Do you know where the evidence is for the traditional sealer shrinkage? Is that something?
Yeah,
so post the links to?
Yeah, we can. I mean, it's well known. I mean, that's why heated gutta percha techniques all arose, is because we know that sealers shrink. All the tradition, anything like we know resins shrink. It's like so when you mix them, straight away there's a setting reaction and they all shrink. So it's only a matter of shrinking. Now the idea of heating the GP using heat means that it's also going to shrink as well. So that's why I actually prefer cold hydraulic condensation, where you just inject the sealer, you place the GP in cold, and let me show you a video. We have a video coming up here of the actual obturation techniques.
While you look at that, can you please let us know if there are any effects on outcome if there's an extrusion of the sealer, for example, for the bioceramics?
So just before we go on to that, it's like, did everyone get to play with the Irriflex as well? So I think the Irriflex is brilliant. It's so this is the issue with the metal needles, is that it just can't go around the curves. It's like, so today I had a couple of cases where I had long, narrow roots like this. I made a 2504 shape with the new files, and the Irriflex easily slides to 1 millimeter from length. And it's like, it's just a beautiful way to get, whereas if you use a metal needle, the metal needle will engage much higher up coronally. So have a look here again. Okay, so see with the metal needles get stopped. And I remember when I used to do, before I did my endo training and even during my endo training, when we were using metal needles, I mean, our metal needles were getting nowhere near the apical part in difficult cases. So it's like the fluid exchange is just 1 millimeter or 2 beyond where the needle reaches. So the big advantage of using the Irriflex is that it can really reach down to reach easily down to the very bottom of the canal. Now, there's a couple of little tips for when you use Irriflex. Is one, you need to pre-bend it a little bit, so you need to curve it before you put it into the canals. You need to have magnification to use it because you need to be able to see that you're putting, because the tip is fragile, so you need to place it directly. If you bash it off the base of the floor, it's going to bend and then it's not going to work as well. So it takes a few cases to actually get used to using it, but once you get the feel for it, people who buy Irriflex they're really, we've got a really high return customer rate for that. People are really happy once they've got the feel for it, but you need to try it a couple of times before you get the feel for it. So I know it's getting late now. I'm just going to try and finish up.
A question.
Okay, so this is our gutta percha cutter. So the whole idea of this is that we can use a very small taper GP. We can cut it to whatever tip we desire, really, and then we can get a really nice apical tug back so that we can get a good fit of the GP apically. And the whole idea of that then is that we can bring our one fill bioceramic sealer all the way to the apical part. We're using the GP as a plugger. So let's say we finish our preparation on a 2506, so we can pop this over. We're going to pop our GP point into the 25 hole, which is in there. And then using our blade, okay, we'll get a nice cut. That's going to be exactly 25 tip. Okay, so we can see that's exactly 25 tip. Now we take that out, we place that into the canal at our working length. It's going to be exactly 25 tip. It's going to act as a plunger to bring our one fill right down to the apical part of the tooth, and it just makes obturation a lot easier. The advantage of using a narrow cone like this is that we're not going to get taper lock. So we're not going to get a lot of the tapered cones if you've got long roots, because the working blades stop at 16 millimeters, but the GP cones are a continuous taper all along. Often those tips can get caught up coronally up the canal, and then it can find it difficult to actually place the cone to length.
Okay, so here's a clinical case now of just to show how cold obturation. So I like these visco tips to inject the one fill in. It's you don't need to use them. There's two other tips that come with it as well. So, but they are material saving tips. So what it means is that according to manufacturers, you use almost 80% less sealer. So kind of what you spend on the tips, you save on sealer. So here in this case, literally, I've just used this, the FIP. So I use the FIP for heating the hypochlorite in the canals. So in this case, I've just literally seared it at coronal level. The clear up of the one fill is really quick. And look at all the lateral anatomy that we've managed to seal from just a single cone, injected in the one fill, and it's just cold hydraulic. So the GP is literally pushing the sealer into all the anatomy. And it's just a really quick, fast, efficient way to obturate. So there's no point spending half an hour trying to obturate with all the complex kind of heat treatment techniques. Spend that time getting the canals cleaner and just make your obturation efficient. And it's a really nice way to do it. So there's a couple of questions on the Irriflex. So you do need to be careful with the Irriflex when you use it initially. It's like what you should do is, everyone has a sample of it tonight. Just play with it. See how powerful it is. So you need to just literally go drop by drop, because you're bringing it deep down into the canal. If you inject it with your thumb or you put pressure, absolutely, you're going to get extrusion. So you do need to respect how efficient it is and how deep you are actually bringing the hypochlorite into the system. So the way that I use it is it's almost like the way I do it with the file. So I place the Irriflex into the canal, I see where it wants to stop, then I come back a tiny bit, then I irrigate almost on the way out. And I just go up and down, up and down, up and down on the way out. And it's a really efficient way to irrigate, and it's really nice. We've got some new things as well, which are really good. So we've got these, I think we've just started to get them on the website now. But we've got these little, I'm going to change the camera here. So we've got these little plastic tips. So these affect on these, so the problem with a lot of the metal tips is that you can't really, you can't safely bring them around curves. So we've got these little plastic tips now that attach onto your ultrasonics. And these can go much deeper down into the canal. Now I use these in two ways. Sometimes I just literally use them passively rather than GP pumping, which can be frustrating sometimes because the GP can end up getting buckle. Whereas this got a little bit more, it's a little firmer, so you can do it a little bit more efficiently. So I bring it down, see where it wants to go. Again, same thing as the file, same way as I use the Irriflex, see where it wants to go, up and down. And then as I'm coming out, I activate the ultrasound, and then you see loads of debris coming out of the canal. So it's a really efficient way to activate the hypochlorite. Now, that's quite hard to kind of teach remotely. That's something that we kind of show when we have real extracted teeth, because we need to be able to see how to clean isthmuses, how to clean lateral canals, how to move the debris that's caught in the fins and the apical areas. But just to introduce the concept of it. So if you want, have a play with the obturation techniques. We don't need to kind of do that officially. You can do that yourself and send us your results. I'm just going to go over, just make sure I've answered all the questions, and then we're going to wrap up. So is there any need case for warm vertical with bioceramic? So again, it's the same answer as what I say all the time. It's like there's no set things. What you have to do is you have to look at the case in front of you and decide what's the optimum way to seal this case. So it's very different if you've got a very thin distal buccal root and an upper six that's very narrow and very small, and a cone, if you finish at a 2504, let's say, a 2004 cone or a 25 cone fits perfectly to length, so you're going to have a little thin bit of sealer anyway. So in that case, single cone technique, absolutely fine, no problems at all. If you've got a very wide distal canal that's like that's oval shaped, then it becomes a little trickier, because you have to figure out, okay, how am I going to optimally seal this? So you want to get a cone that's going to engage and have some tug back apically. So again, I use the medium fine cones in that and try and get the biggest medium fine cone that will get to length. And then I'll put in accessory cones. So I'll put in some 2004s, or I'll put in some medium fine cones. So almost like cold lateral condensation, except for I'm not using a spreader. I'm just putting all the GP in laterally. And then I will heat it up halfway down the canal. So I inject the sealer into the apical part, use the GP cones, and then just very gently use some warm vertical condensation at 150 degrees rather than any higher temperature. Now, the reason why, I mean, heat affects all sealers. So heat affects AH+, heat affects our zinc oxide eugenol. But the reason we try and avoid heat with the bioceramics is that it desiccates the tooth, and you need to have some moisture in the dentinal tubules for the sealer to set. So it's better if you don't use heat, but you can use a very gentle heat if you're just on the GP and just very kind of gentle packing down. But what I don't encourage is bringing heat pluggers deep down into the system for lots of reasons. One is that you have to do a much bigger preparation to do that. And second of all, now with the techniques that we have, you don't need to do that. There's much easier ways to do it. There's also some cases where we will inject sealer and then just pack some one fill putty down as well. And that's a really nice technique to get a really good predictable seal apically. And I'll post some cases on our Facebook group about exactly how I do that over the next couple of weeks as well. So any effect on outcome if there's extrusion of bioceramic sealer? So, I mean, one of the big advantages of bioceramic sealer is that they're so biocompatible. So, I mean, when you look at the cytotoxicity studies, it's like the resin cements are way more cytotoxic than bioceramic sealers. Like the tricalcium silicates are used in grafting. So there's no real, I mean, we don't aim to extrude, and it's better if you don't extrude. But there doesn't seem to be any negative sequelae, definitely in terms of pain, because I've had loads of cases where we've had extrusion of bioceramic sealer with no pain reported afterwards, and the healing actually seems to be really quick. Yoshi has posted loads of cases where he intentionally extrudes MTA, and you can see on the follow-up cone beam CT scans that because when the bioceramic sealer set, they release calcium hydroxide. And the alkaline environment seems to be a really good way of promoting healing. And he has loads of cases where you can see the bone growing preferentially towards the extruded material. So in lots of cases, he will actually purposely extrude the MTA outside of the canals. It's not something I personally intentionally do, but I do try and get the bioceramic right up to our 0 rating. So I try and inject it into the canal, and then I'm using the GP point as a plugger to bring it right down to the apical part. So is there a greater risk? So yeah, as I mentioned, just be really careful with the Irriflex when you're using that your first couple of cases. It's like all of these things have a small learning curve. So just don't risk. So it's like place the Irriflex and just gently irrigate on the way out. Make sure the needle isn't bound. Make sure you're not using your thumb, and just literally go drop by drop. Okay, so I think that's all the questions. If I've missed out anybody, feel free to message me. Thank you so much for giving up your Friday evenings to learn about Endo. If anybody wants a sample of the new files, just send us a message and we'll get you a free sample. If anyone's been missing blocks, we'll send you free blocks as well. Louise will also do some offer for everyone who does our courses. We'll do an amazing kind of intro offer for the files as well, where there'll be something like 50% off. So just message us if you'd like to avail of that as well. And as always, if you have any questions, please let us know. Please give us some free feedback on this and how we can make it better. And if you've problems, just post it on the Facebook group. We're so lucky. There's so many really knowledgeable clinicians that are so happy to help out. And I'm really happy with the kind of atmosphere and the kind of the helpful nature of the group. So it's like, please contribute, let us know how it's going, and hopefully we're going to see a bigger enjoyment, and you'll have better results on your endo in practice. So hope you enjoyed it tonight, and we'll see you soon. Bye. Okay. Great, guys. Thank you so much. If anyone has any questions that you just want to ask me directly, please feel free. I'll hang on for another couple of minutes. So if you want to speak directly, you can just unmute yourself.
What's the cross-section of the new files?
So the cross-section is, so there's two different cross-sections in it, but they're basically triangular. I'll send you the actual shape of them. So this is kind of a slightly different to most systems are consistent the whole way through the series of files. So for this, we have 3 variable tapered files and 3 constant taper files. So the thinking of that is that you can mix and match to help you depending on the case. So, I mean, for me, I think the best file in this whole series is going to be the glide path file, the 15 file. So that's a 15 tip, and the taper is variable between 2 and 6%. But for the last couple of weeks I've been using it, you will be, once you've done your orifice shaping, you can get to length in the vast majority of cases. So if that's all the questions, thanks very much for joining us, and just message us on the, you can either message us directly or we'll see you on the group. Bye.